He told me I'd be nothing without him. And for a long time, I believed him. But today he's the one calling. He's the one begging. Funny how silence becomes the loudest answer. When I think about our marriage now, it feels like watching an old movie, one I've seen too many times to still believe in the ending. At first, it was everything I thought love was supposed to be. He was kind, kind of charming in a quiet way that made me feel safe. He remembered how I liked my coffee, laughed at my bad jokes, sent flowers for no reason. I used to tell my friends, I found the one. And they'd smile jealous in a soft, friendly way. For a while I truly believed I'd won the lottery of life. But love doesn't disappear in a single day, it fades quietly. Like a candle that still burns but the flame isn't warm anymore. He didn't yell or throw things or slam doors. He just stopped listening. The man who used to hang on every word began to glance at his phone when I spoke. When I asked how his day was, he'd shrug. When I shared something about mine, he'd say, "You worry too much." First I thought he was tired. Then I thought I was. Eventually I realized I was tired of shrinking myself to fit the silence between us. He'd make small comments that seemed harmless, almost loving. "Don't wear that color, it's too bright for you." Maybe skip dessert. "You said you wanted to lose weight. You're so sensitive." "It's just a joke." Each time I laughed it off, pretending it didn't sting. But his words left fingerprints on my confidence, invisible but permanent. Sometimes control sounds like care. He'd say, "I just want what's best for you." And somehow, what's best always meant what he wanted. I stopped painting. Stopped calling old friends. Even stopped visiting my mother as often because she filled my head with nonsense. He never forbade me outright. He just made it uncomfortable enough that I chose not to. We had dinners where silence was the loudest sound in the room. He'd scroll through his phone and I'd stare at my plate, counting the clicks of the clock on the wall. There's a special kind of loneliness that comes from sitting across the table from someone who once swore you were their whole world, and realizing they don't even look at you anymore. Once I tried to bring it up. I told him I felt invisible. He sighed, leaned back in his chair and said, "You're being dramatic again. You always take things so personally." And just like that, the conversation ended before it began. Because when someone decides your feelings are invalid, every word you speak after that feels like begging for permission to exist. Till I stayed. Because leaving would mean admitting it was broken and I wasn't ready to face that yet. We were the couple everyone envied. The perfect pair. The people others pointed at and said, "That's what love should look like." I didn't want to ruin that picture. So I kept polishing it even when the glass had already cracked. He started to manage the money. "It's easier if I handle it," he'd said. Soon after, I realized I didn't even know how much was in our joint account. He called it protecting me. I called it losing myself. But only in my head, never out loud. He never raised his hand. He never shouted. But emotional bruises don't show up in mirrors. One evening I tried to surprise him. I spent all day cooking his favorite meal, slow-roasted chicken, the one from our first anniversary. I lit candles, wore the perfume he once said reminded him of summer. When he came home he barely looked up. Just said, "You didn't have to go through all this trouble." Then opened his laptop at the table. I remember standing there, still holding the serving spoon, realizing I was celebrating alone. After that night, something inside me started to dim. I stopped expecting kindness. Stopped hoping for understanding. I began to live quietly like a ghost in my own home. Days blurred together, laundry, dishes, small talk, sleep. Repeat. And yet, somewhere beneath all that silence, something stubborn remained. A part of me that refused to die completely. It showed up in tiny rebellions, staying up late to write in my journal, humming songs he didn't like, keeping a little jar of savings hidden behind the books on the shelf. It wasn't much. But it was mine. Sometimes he'd look at me like he was still trying to figure out who I was, as if the version of me he'd built in his mind didn't quite match the one standing in front of him. And every time he said, "You'd be nothing without me," I'd smile faintly and whisper to myself, "We'll see." I didn't know it then, but that quiet defiance, that tiny spark, would one day burn bright enough to light my way out. I don't remember the exact day the marriage ended. I remember the evening. We were hosting dinner, just a few friends from his work, the kind who always seemed to orbit his stories and laugh at the right moments. I cooked too much, set the table the way he liked, laid out the good glasses we kept for show. He arrived late, loud, already carrying the room like a trophy. Everyone stood when he walked in. No one noticed I was already there. Small talk filled the space like steam. Promotions, quarterly numbers, a trip someone took to a city I used to want to live in. I smiled the way people smile when they're stepping around something sharp on the floor. When the food finally landed, one of his friends asked me lightly what I'd been up to lately. I heard the care in his voice. The question came from a good place. I said, "I've been studying again. I think I'll finish my degree this year." The table quieted the way tables do when a plate slips. My husband laughed, but it wasn't cruel. It was worse. It was familiar. "Her degree," he told them, waving a hand. "She loves projects." The room laughed with him. I stared at my water glass and watched the light break against the rim. He wasn't done. "Babe, let's be serious," he said, soft enough to sound kind. "If you really wanted to work, you would have done it by now. You don't like stress." He squeezed my shoulder as if he were comforting me, as if he were saving me from myself. The touch felt like a spotlight. I felt something inside me pause, then step back. Not out of fear. Out of clarity. There was the version of me he spoke to, the girl who was nothing without him, and there was the person sitting in my body who did not belong to that story anymore. I collected plates. I refilled glasses. I moved around the table quietly as if I were floating just above the floor. Their voices blurred. I caught a sentence here and there. The market, timelines, bonus. He told a story about our first vacation as if I hadn't been there. I corrected nothing. When the door closed behind the last guest, the house sighed into silence. He started to clear, then saw I'd already done it. We stood at the sink, shoulder to shoulder, looking out at our dark backyard. "That went well," he said. "They like you when you keep it light." I dried a glass. "Do they like me?" I asked. "Or do they like the way you've edited me?" He frowned, the way people frown when you move a piece they didn't realize was part of their puzzle. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," I said calmly, "you tell them who I am and they believe you." He laughed again, too quickly. "Oh, here we go. Don't start. You get dramatic when you're tired. It should have hurt. Instead it fell off me like water." I set the glass down, wiped my hands on a towel, and felt my heartbeat slow into something steady. "I'm not tired," I said. "I'm done." He blinked. The word didn't fit in his mouth. Done with what? With pretending this is enough. He leaned against the counter, choosing a different tactic. Softer. "You're upset because I teased you. I'm sorry. Don't overthink everything. We're fine." There was a time I'd have cried then. A time I would have reached for his apology like a life raft, just to keep the peace, to save the picture. But peace without dignity is just quiet. And I was finished confusing the two. I nodded as if to myself. "I'm going to bed," I said. "I've got an early morning." In our room, I closed the door and sat on the edge of the bed without turning on the light. The house hummed its small nocturnal sounds. The fridge settling, the heater exhaling, a branch tapping the window like someone politely asking to be let in. I listened to my own breathing. Sounded like someone else's, slow, sure. I opened the top drawer of my nightstand and took out a small notebook. The one I'd been keeping quietly, the one with lists that looked like prayers. Questions, numbers, reminders that read like instructions to a future I wasn't allowed to say out loud. I turned to a fresh page and wrote 3 words. Make it real. I packed a bag that night without packing anything. I moved through the room, touching what used to define me, the photo frames, the dress I wore on our first New Year's, and I left everything where it was. I didn't need proof of my past. I needed a path toward my future. In the morning, I woke before the alarm. He mumbled something into his pillow about coffee. I made 2 cups and set his on the nightstand because kindness was not a currency I wanted to run out of. Then I sat at the kitchen table with my notebook and my laptop and began. I checked the balance of the joint account. I wrote it down. I opened an account in my name only. I wrote that down too. I looked up the last email I'd sent to an old professor who once told me my brain was a room with the lights off. Not empty, just dark, and that I only needed to find the switch. I wrote to him again. "May I audit your class until I enroll? I want to finish." I called the registrar. I called the library about a card. I scheduled a meeting with the financial aid office. When he came out in his shirt and tie, he kissed the top of my head like habit. "You're up early," he said. "I have things to do," I answered. My voice sounded like a hallway with the doors open. He glanced at the laptop screen at the email draft bearing my maiden name in the signature. Since when do you use that? I looked up. Since I remembered it belonged to me. He gave a half smile that didn't reach his eyes. You're cute when you're stubborn. Then I must be adorable, I said and hit send. Change didn't arrive like a storm. It arrived like careful weather. I didn't leave that day. I didn't announce anything. I simply stopped asking for permission to be a person. Days developed a new shape. I worked mornings at a small cafe 2 neighborhoods away, where no one knew me as his wife. I wiped tables, learned the register, spilled milk, laughed with a girl named Danny who wore chipped nail polish and called everyone sweetheart. I liked the way she said my name as if it were obvious I had one. Afternoons I studied. I sat in the back of a classroom with a pencil that smudged, filling notebooks with thoughts I didn't have to defend. I stayed late in the library until the lights flickered in a gentle suggestion that the day had to end. I walked home slow, feeling the city move around me like a larger set of lungs. At dinner I stopped filling silence with small talk. He'd ask about my day and I'd answer simply, not apologizing for the parts he didn't value. When he said, "You don't have to do all this," I said, "I know." When he said, "You won't like the stress," I said, "I already live with it." And when he said, "You'd be nothing without me," I didn't cry. I looked at him the way you look at a portrait you've outgrown, grateful for the years it hung on your wall, ready to take it down. A few weeks later he wanted to host again. "Everyone's been asking about you," he said brightly. "They were impressed with how you handled yourself last time. You were quiet." His compliment landed like a paper napkin. That night the table was set with the same glasses and the same jokes. I wore a simple black dress and an expression I kept soft. When someone asked me again what I'd been up to, I didn't look to him for approval. "I'm finishing my degree," I said. "I'm working part-time too. It's good." I didn't overshare. I didn't try to sell my life. I just said the truth out loud and it stayed in the air like a new piece of furniture everyone had to walk around. He laughed, reflex muscle memory. "Her degree," he started, smiling. I touched his forearm lightly, the way you do when you're about to thank someone and instead choose to interrupt them. "Let me finish," I said gently. The room shifted. It was small, almost nothing, a sentence you could miss if you weren't listening closely, but a woman across the table met my eyes and smiled. He heard it. He blinked. "Go on," he said, stepping back from the version of the conversation he knew how to control. I went on. Not too long. Not to prove a point. Just long enough to tell the story without asking permission to be in it. After they left, there was no fight. He wandered around the kitchen, opened a drawer, closed it, opened it again as if the forks might tell him what had changed. "You're different," he finally said. "I'm the same," I answered. "You're just hearing me now." He stood very still and for the first time I saw it, the truth he'd kept from both of us. He believed the same line he'd taught me to repeat. He believed I was nothing without him and he needed me to keep believing it too. Not because he hated me. Because he needed to be necessary. That night I didn't write a list. I wrote a letter. Not to him. To myself. Said, "You are not difficult for wanting more. You are not dramatic for naming what hurts. You are not cruel for leaving a room that doesn't want you to speak. Walk toward the life that answers you back." I folded the page and slid it into the book on my nightstand. I lay down and closed my eyes and for the first time in years, sleep felt like a place I was allowed to enter without knocking. The marriage didn't end at a courthouse or a climax. It ended in that quiet. In the moment I chose a voice over a truce. In the way the house sounded when I stopped asking it for permission to breathe. And the next morning when he asked if I could cancel my shift because he wanted to go to lunch, I said, "No. I have plans." 3 words. No apology. A door that opened inward and stayed that way. The first weeks felt strange, like living inside a quiet echo. The house was the same but everything sounded different. The absence of his voice didn't leave silence, it left space. And space, I was learning, was a beautiful thing. At first I didn't know what to do with it. I'd wake early, make coffee and just sit there, hands wrapped around the mug, watching the steam twist into the light. There was no one to impress. No one to ask permission. That kind of freedom is heavy at first. You have to learn how to hold it. I worked longer hours at the cafe. My hands ached from scrubbing tables and steaming milk, But it was the kind of ache that meant something. It meant I was building, not breaking. Sometimes I'd catch my reflection in the espresso machine, tired eyes, hair pulled back, a small smile that didn't need approval. For years I'd thought hard work was supposed to make me smaller, quieter. Now I realized it could make me solid again. The regulars started learning my name. A man who came every morning called me Professor, because I always had a notebook open next to the till. I liked that. Sounded like a life I might still have. Money was tight, painfully so. I kept a spreadsheet, a journal, and a little tin box for emergencies, all the things he used to take care of. But there was a quiet joy in knowing that if I messed up, it was my mistake. No one would sigh over it. No one would use it as proof that I wasn't capable. Evenings were for school. Sitting in those lectures after so many years felt like returning to a part of myself I'd left behind in another lifetime. I didn't speak much at first. It's hard to raise your hand after years of being told your thoughts are noise. But one afternoon a professor asked a question no one answered. I did quietly. And when she said, "That's an excellent point," I felt something click back into place. Recognition. Respect. My own voice louder than I remembered. I walked home that night under cold streetlights, smiling like a secret. I thought, maybe this is what healing actually looks like, small victories no one claps for. The next morning, Danny, my coworker, noticed. "You look different," she said. "Different how?" I asked. "Like you're not waiting for something anymore." He was right. For the first time in years I wasn't. We became close, the kind of easy friendship that doesn't need to be explained. She'd tell me about her chaotic love life. I'd tell her stories about mistakes I'd already lived through. We laughed too loud sometimes, spilled coffee, made fun of our boss. It felt good to exist in a space where nothing about me was too much. One evening she brought an old film camera. "I'm practicing portraits," she said. I told her I wasn't photogenic. She rolled her eyes. "Everyone says that right before I prove them wrong." The photo she took that night ended up meaning more than I expected. It wasn't glamorous, just me sitting outside, hair messy, the city glowing behind me. But I looked real. No mask, no fear, no performance. It became the first picture of myself I didn't want to delete. That photo started something. I printed it and pinned it to my wall. It was like a flag, not of victory but of return. The caption I wrote under it said, "Still here." By the second month I'd started waking up before my alarm. There's something addictive about progress, even slow progress. You begin to crave the small steps, the clear inbox, the finished chapter, the shift that ends with a clean counter and tired feet. My world had shrunk and expanded all at once. I didn't have luxury dinners or weekend trips anymore. But I had peace. I had quiet mornings that felt earned. And that was worth more than anything I'd given up. Every now and then his name would appear on my phone. At first it was about logistics, bills, mail, old paperwork. Then it shifted. "I saw something that reminded me of you. I miss our talks. You've changed." The last one made me smile. Of course I had. I didn't reply, not out of spite, but because I didn't need to prove that growth had happened. Sometimes silence is the most powerful kind of closure. A few weeks later I visited my mother. She lived 2 towns away in a house that always smelled like cinnamon and old books. She opened the door, looked at me and froze for a second. "You look like yourself again," she said. I hadn't realized how far I'd drifted until that moment. We talked for hours about everything and nothing. She told me stories I'd forgotten about when I was little and fearless. And I thought, maybe she kept those stories safe for me for when I was ready to hear them again. By spring things began to align. I got a small scholarship, nothing huge but enough to breathe easier. At the cafe my boss offered me a raise. And in class I presented my first research project, hands shaking, voice steady. When it was over, people clapped. It wasn't a standing ovation but it felt like one. That night I bought myself flowers, yellow tulips. I used to think flowers were a luxury someone gave you. Now I knew they could be something you gave yourself. A quiet celebration that didn't need witnesses. Life wasn't cinematic. It was slow, simple, and beautifully ordinary. I learned that healing doesn't look like fireworks. It looks like consistency. Cooking dinner for one. Folding laundry while humming. Falling asleep without waiting for a door to open or a voice to fill the silence. One morning I was walking to class when I passed a bookstore. In the window was a notebook with gold letters that said, "Write it down before you forget who you were." I bought it instantly. Every night I'd fill a page not about him, not about pain, but about me. Small things. What made me laugh, what scared me, what I wanted next. And slowly, those pages became proof that I existed outside of his narrative. Then came the letter, not from him but from the university. "Congratulations, your degree has been conferred." I read it 3 times before it sank in. I'd done it. Quietly. On my own. No applause, no validation, just the sound of my own breathing and the steady rhythm of something whole again. That night I stood by my window, the city humming softly below. It was raining, light and steady. And for the first time in years I wasn't lonely in the rain. I was free in it. I made a cup of tea, opened my new notebook and wrote one line at the top of a blank page. He said I'd be nothing without him. But I became everything I needed. It had been almost 2 years since I left. Long enough for pain to lose its sharp edges, for silence to stop sounding like absence. My life had shape now, quiet, steady, full of small things that belonged only to me. I didn't think of him much anymore. Sometimes his name would pass through conversation, someone asking how I was doing or if we still spoke. I'd just smile and say, "No, but I wish him well." And I meant it. Letting go, I'd learned, wasn't about forgiveness. It was about no longer needing an apology. Then one afternoon my phone buzzed while I was finishing a shift. The name on the screen made my stomach tighten, not in fear but in memory. I stared at it for a long moment before answering. "Hey," he said. His voice hadn't changed, smooth, familiar, rehearsed. "Hey," I said back, neutral. There was a pause, the kind that used to make me rush to fill the silence. This time I didn't. "I heard about your degree," he said finally. "Congratulations." "Thank you." "I always knew you'd do something like that," he added. I almost laughed. "No, you didn't," I said softly. "But I'm glad I did anyway." He chuckled awkwardly. "You sound different." "I am," I said. "How are you?" He told me about work, about how things were busy. He used the same words he always had when avoiding the truth. Then he said it, the real reason for the call. I was thinking. Maybe we could catch up. Have dinner. Just talk. There was a time when that sentence would have made my heart race. Now it only made me check the clock. "I don't think that's a good idea," I said. "But I hope you're doing okay." He hesitated, surprised by the firmness in my tone. "You're still mad at me," he said. I shook my head even though he couldn't see it. "No," I said quietly. "I'm just not yours to apologize to anymore." He didn't respond. The line went still, like even the air had nothing left to offer. I ended the call first. For weeks he didn't reach out again. Then one morning I found a letter in my mailbox, his handwriting, neat and familiar. Inside was a photograph of us from years ago and a note. "I miss who we were. I miss who you were." I sat at the kitchen table holding the photo under the morning light. We looked perfect in it, smiling, unaware of the storm that would come. But the woman in the picture wasn't me anymore. She was someone who needed to be chosen to feel worthy. Now I chose myself. I folded the letter carefully, slid it into the drawer beside my old notebooks and didn't answer. Life kept moving. Work, classes, a growing circle of friends. I barely noticed how full my days had become. Then one evening while leaving the cafe I saw him. Standing across the street, leaning against his car, looking almost out of place in my world. The sight didn't hurt. It just surprised me. Like running into someone from a dream you'd stopped remembering. He waved. I hesitated, then walked over. "Hey," I said. "Hey," he echoed. His smile was cautious, practiced. "You look good." "So do you," I replied, because kindness costs nothing. There was an awkward beat. He looked around like he was waiting for permission to exist in this version of my life. "Can I buy you a coffee?" he asked. I thought about it for a moment, then nodded. "Sure. 1 coffee." We went to a small place nearby, not the cafe where I worked. Neutral ground. He talked a lot at first about work, mutual friends, a new apartment. It was strange. The rhythm was the same, but the melody had changed. He still filled every silence, but now I didn't shrink to make space for him. After a while he grew quieter. He studied me like a puzzle he used to know the answer to. Finally he said, "You really are different." "I told you I was," I said. "I didn't think you'd stay that way." I smiled. "That's because you thought I was made in your image. Turns out I was just living in your shadow." He looked down, fidgeted with the sleeve of his shirt. I wasn't good to you, he said finally. No, I agreed. You weren't. He nodded slowly. If I could change things, you can't, I interrupted gently. And you don't need to. I did. That silence again, but this time it wasn't mine to fill. He looked tired, older somehow. Not in the way time changes people, in the way regret does. He exhaled. You make it sound so easy. It wasn't, I said. But it was worth it. He laughed softly. You always had this way of turning pain into poetry. Maybe, I said, but only because I finally stopped letting other people write my lines. When the check came, I reached for it. He started to protest. I've got it. But I shook my head. No. I pay for my own now. He didn't argue. Outside it had started to rain, gentle, steady. We stood under the awning waiting for it to slow. He looked at me like he wanted to say something more but couldn't find the right words. Finally he said, I miss you. I nodded. I know. Do you ever think about us? Sometimes, I said. But only like a story I once read, the kind that ends exactly when it should. He swallowed, the words catching in his throat. I just thought maybe we could try again. There was no malice in it, no manipulation, just the desperation of someone who realized too late what they destroyed. I met his eyes. You said I'd be nothing without you. He winced like the memory still cut. I know, he whispered. I was wrong. I know that too, I said softly. But I needed you to say it, not because I needed to hear it, but because you needed to understand it. He nodded, a quiet acceptance passing between us like smoke. He reached out slightly, not to touch me, just to test the air. I didn't move back, but I didn't step closer either. Some distances are worth keeping. Goodbye, I said. Goodbye, he echoed. You really don't need me anymore, do you? I smiled, not proud, not cruel, just at peace. No, I said. But thank you for teaching me how to. I walked away before he could reply. That night I didn't cry. I didn't replay the conversation in my head or wonder what might have been. I made tea, sat by the window and watched the rain slide down the glass. The city glowed below, blurred, soft, alive. And I realized something simple and true. Healing isn't when the pain stops. It's when the past can sit across from you and you no longer flinch. The night after I saw him, I couldn't sleep, not because of what he said, but because of what I didn't feel. There was no ache, no anger, no tremor of what. Just a calm, steady awareness that the story was over. I sat by the window watching the city breathe. It had rained earlier and the streets were still slick with light. Cars moved below like slow, glowing veins. Somewhere someone was laughing. Somewhere someone was leaving. And in between all that motion I sat still and free. He'd said he missed me. He'd said he missed who I used to be. But that woman doesn't live here anymore. She left quietly, the night she realized she didn't have to wait for permission to matter. And in her place someone else arrived, someone quieter, stronger, unshakable. Healing didn't come like thunder. It came like morning. Soft, slow, inevitable. The kind of light that doesn't ask to be noticed, it just fills the room once the night has done its job. I used to think closure meant a perfect conversation or a final apology, or someone finally saying the right words. But it doesn't. It means being able to tell the story without wanting to go back into it. Sometimes I still remember small things, the way he'd pour coffee, the sound of his shoes on the tile, how he always whistled when he was nervous. They don't hurt anymore. They're just sounds from another lifetime. And lifetimes, I've learned, aren't always measured in years. Sometimes they're measured in who you were when you loved someone and who you became when you stopped. People ask me now if I'd ever take him back. I smile and say, he's not coming back to me. He's coming back to the version of me that needed him. And she doesn't exist anymore. Last week I got an email from the department chair, a new teaching opportunity. They want me to help other women finish their degrees. It's funny how the world circles back like that. How what once broke you becomes what you're trusted to rebuild. That evening I walked home under a violet sky. The air smelled like rain and jasmine. And I realized I wasn't walking away from anything anymore. I was simply walking toward my life. At home I brewed tea, sat at the same table where I used to count coins and opened my old notebook, the one that began with the words, "Make it real." Most of the pages were filled now. Goals, ideas, fragments of thoughts I didn't know I'd ever write again. At the very end I added one last line. He said I'd be nothing without him. But I became everything without asking his permission. I closed the notebook and smiled. It wasn't a triumphant smile, just quiet recognition. The kind you give yourself when you finally understand that every version of you, even the broken ones, built the bridge that got you here. I made peace with her, the woman who stayed too long, who believed the wrong words, who cried herself into silence. She wasn't weak. She was surviving the only way she knew how. And I love her for that. Because she carried me here to the part of the story where I get to choose what happens next. Before bed, I opened the window and let the cool air in. Somewhere outside, someone's wind chimes sang softly. I thought of all the noise I once called love, the arguments, the apologies, the promises, and how silence now felt so much kinder. I turned off the lights and lay down, the city humming faintly beneath the night. And just before sleep found me, I whispered to no one in particular, I hope he finds peace too. Because real freedom, I've learned, isn't proving someone wrong. It's living so fully that their opinion no longer matters. Sometimes stories don't end with a goodbye. Sometimes they just stop hurting. If you've ever loved, lost, or learned, you already understand. This was Moonlight Confessions. Until next time.